Photography is the art of capturing light, so the light that you're capturing has to be one of the most important factors for any photographer. Today we're going to be taking a look at the different types of light that you can use as a photographer and what advantages each of them have. So settle in and I'll get started. Hi guys, I'm Ben from Adaptalux and today we are taking a look at the different types of light that you can use as a photographer. So let's get started with our first type of light, and probably one that you'll be at least a little bit familiar with. I come over here because there's a little bit more of this first type of light, natural light. So when we're talking about natural light, more often than not, we're going to be talking about the sun. During the day, the sun is our primary source of light, not only for us as people making our way around and doing things in the daytime, but also as photographers. There's a lot of things to consider when you're using natural light though. It's not quite as simple as it seems. You need to consider the time of day and the weather, and also the time of year. If you're shooting during the day and you want nice diffused light, you're going to need some cloud cover. If you want more light and absolutely powerful light to get the best settings, you want direct sunlight, probably in the middle of the day. There's something that we call the golden hour later in the day that gives a really nice warm look to your images when the sun is quite low down in the sky, and then of course when the sun is setting you get those classic sunsets. So with natural light it might seem pretty straightforward, but there's a few things to consider. One of the main advantages though is that it's completely free. Everybody has access to sunlight unless you're living in one of the poles or in a cave. Then you're going to use natural light at some point during your photographic career. There are a few things that we can do with natural light to change the look of our scenes and our subjects. The first of which being the direction of the lighting. Obviously, if you're shooting outside, the sun is in the same position and you'll have to wait until a different time of day or year to get that into a different position. Something we can do though is manipulate our subject and our scene to suit exactly where the sun is or where our light is coming from. For things like macro photography, that's particularly easy because we've got a nice small subject and we can move that around to wherever we need it. Shooting in front of a window or door gives you that single source of light and that single direction of light to shoot with, and you can move your subject around to exactly where you need it to be for the light direction. If you wanted to diffuse your light, we can do that as well. Obviously we can't go and put any diffusion material over the sun, it's a little bit too far away and quite hot. But we can put diffusion material over our subjects. So if you have a big piece of semi-translucent material, you can use that to diffuse bright, direct sunlight coming to hit your subject. You can also use reflectors to bounce that sunlight back onto a different side of your subject, or just onto your subject in general to change how the light is falling. The next type of light that we're going to talk about is a bit of an ambiguous one. It's the one that confuses people quite often because it's not quite as well defined as simply man-made or not. Available light or ambient light. What does that mean? Well, it means light that is already quite literally available in your scene before you start doing any photography or any editing of your lighting. So things like fire or candles, natural light can be considered available light. Light bulbs that are hanging from ceilings if you're going into a brand new room. If the light is already there and you haven't put it there for the purposes of photography, that is available light, and you're using essentially the light that is already available to you in the scene without having to add anything. Now, what does this mean to us as photographers? As a macro photographer, I could take this little candle, put my subject right next to it, and I'd be using available light because I didn't put that candle there specifically for photography purposes. If you're shooting room scenes or portraiture, finding available light sources is really, really handy. It can make some really interesting, impactful lighting, and it can often mean a lot more to the photographer, to the subject, especially if it's a portrait. If you're only using what is already in the scene, it means that you're not tampering with the way that the scene actually looks in real life. The opposite of natural light is artificial light. I'm using artificial light right now to light this video, to light myself, to light the background. I've got two big soft boxes at 45 degrees just to light myself and give me some consistency. So I've been making these videos for about a year now, and if I were using or relying upon natural light to light my videos, then everything would be different from video to video. I'm not shooting at the same time of day or the same time of year all of the time, so the light is going to change even depending on the weather. If I rely on some nice consistent artificial light, I can get my lighting looking pretty similar every single time. Now there's two different types of artificial light, and we'll look at those now, starting with continuous light, like I'm using right now. Continuous light is what we've been using with the Adaptalux Studio for quite some time now. LEDs are on all of the time, and that's what makes them continuous. I've got bulbs in these soft boxes and they're continuous as well. All it means is that the light source is on all of the time. So if you've seen some of our other videos, then you'll know that we use continuous light quite often for macro photography. I'll link some videos up in the top corner of the screen now if you want to go and check out some great examples of how to use continuous light for your macro photography. But for now, let's take a look at exactly what the advantages of this are. Why would you want to use light that's on all of the time? It's on all of the time. That's the purpose of it, because you can see it all of the time. You can build your scenes, you can see exactly what your shot is going to look like before you actually press the shutter button. It makes it really, really easy for learning photography, figuring out what differences diffusers make and the placement of your lights. As you make small changes to your scenes, you're going to be able to see the results immediately, both with your own eyes, through the viewfinder and through the live view of your camera, without having any guesswork on what it's actually going to look like. That, I would say, is probably one of the main advantages of using continuous light. The other advantage is that you can use it for video. The light being on all of the time means that you don't have to switch between different types of lighting to switch modes on your camera. If you want to switch over to video mode and capture a little bit of moving footage of your subject, that's absolutely fine, because the lighting that you're going to use will be exactly the same. There is a disadvantage though to continuous light. It means that you can't freeze subjects in motion, at least not without a little bit of difficulty. Things like water drop photography will be very, very tricky with continuous light, because you don't have a single burst of light to freeze the motion of the subject. It is possible with continuous light if you've got enough of it and a really high shutter speed, but even with shutter speeds of, say, 1/4000th of a second, you're still going to get the slightest little bit of movement in there as the position of the water drop changes while that shutter is open. If you've got a lot of light, yeah, you can push that shutter speed up there, but that is it's not the most practical use of our lighting. It will be much better to go and get a flash if you're doing subjects like that. Let's talk about flash. It'll come as no surprise, I'm sure, that flash photography is very, very popular across almost all genres of photography, simply because it can freeze motion. So the big advantage of flash is the big disadvantage of continuous light, and somewhat vice versa as well. As you're using your flash, you'll notice that no matter how slow you push your shutter speed, generally you're going to get a nice sharp image. You can go as low as, say, 1/20th of a second while hand-holding your camera, and as long as your flash is powerful enough, you're still going to get a nice sharp image with no camera shake and very little movement. That means that shooting moving subjects is really, really easy with a flash. You don't need to worry so much about your shutter speed. As you're shooting with flash, things are going to become really apparent that it's a bit more difficult to figure out where your light is actually going or where it's going to go, because you can't see it before you press your shutter button. Now, with some practice, you can obviously get a decent idea of where your light is actually going to fall, but it's not quite the same as seeing it there live. You also can't use flash for video, so that's a bit of a disadvantage to flash as well. Really only bothers you if you're going to be doing video. If you're shooting things like events or portraiture, then you're probably going to be just fine with a flash on the top of your camera. For macro photography, we now have the flash with the Adaptalux Studio. So if you're wanting to shoot, say, insects or water drops, then you can now do that while maintaining the ability to use your Adaptalux Studio for continuous light as well. We wanted to give you all of those options, so now you have them. The last thing I want to touch on when we're talking about choices with lighting is modifying our light. We've already touched on diffusing our natural light. You can do that with your artificial light as well, usually by attaching your diffusion material straight to your light source rather than putting your diffusion material closer to your subject. And the way that works with, say, the Adaptalux Studio is just by attaching a diffuser to the end of a lighting arm, and then that's going to make your shadows a little softer. Other things like color temperature and tint can make a big difference in your images as well. If you've seen all of the white balance settings in your camera and how to play with those, they can be really powerful for setting the mood in a particular scene. It's a little bit more than a creative choice though. It's something that we might need to compensate with different types of light source. So a lot of artificial light will have a Kelvin value attached to them, and this can be inputted directly into your color balance settings in your camera, and you'll get a very natural look out of your images. It's not a temperature value so much as an emotional and impactful value. So if you make your images look blue by changing your color balance, then it's going to make the viewer a little bit melancholy and cold feeling, whereas if things go more orange and yellow, then you're going to feel a little bit warmer. And that is something that changes during the day as well. So if you're using natural light and the clouds come in, then things are going to get cooler, everything's going to look a little bit more blue, and you'll have to compensate using your color balance settings. We also have tint as well, which goes on a scale from purple and magenta up to green. It's not often that you're going to have to change that, but some artificial light might give off a little bit more of a green or purple hue, which you might have to compensate for as well. We can use colour deliberately. The coloured LEDs from the Adaptalux Studio makes for some really interesting and creative choices in your images. You can also use gels over flashes to change the colour of the light that way. Like I said, colour and modifying all of these lights is probably an entirely different video, so make sure to subscribe if you want to see a few more of these explainer videos when it comes to lighting and photography. Hit the bell if you want to be notified next time we upload a video, and make sure to give the video a like if you enjoyed this one. If all of this talk of different types of lighting has inspired you, make sure to go and check out the links down in the description for both our continuous light and our brand new flash lighting arms as well, and learn a little bit more about lighting over on our website and our blog. If all of this is a little bit too much for you and you've got loads of questions, put them down in the comments and I'll be there to answer them for you. For now though guys, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.